So here we are live again. Thank you guys. Thanks for joining to our live podcast. We have special guest all the way from California and Canadian born, living right now in US, investing everywhere in North America. That's an opportunity for us to learn. One and only one, Mr. Thomas. Thomas, welcome to our another podcast. It's a pleasure you to be on here. Uh, I don't want to add much on that. I know you're a real estate investor, a real estate agent. You're also a coach, mentor. You're running the Wealth Genius group as of now. Why not you introduce to our viewers about yourself, and then we go deeper into your lifestyle.
Sure, absolutely. Well, Mandeep, it's a pleasure to be here today on your podcast. Pleasure to be here with your audience. As Mandeep mentioned, I'm originally from Toronto, Canada, born and raised. And about 8 years ago, I moved to California. One of the reasons was my wife is American. So after 5 cold winters in Toronto, she said, let's go to the warm weather. So we did that. And now we're living, in much nicer climate. But, my heart and my family, my siblings and extended family all live back in Toronto. So I come back quite frequently. I've been there 3 times back in Toronto this year.
Okay.
But saying that, in terms of a background as a career and investments, I started in mechanical engineering and schooling. I've been in manufacturing industry for about 15, 18 years, worked in the manufacturing industry for a few companies, mainly automotive. I started buying rental properties, mainly on the side. And it really took until moving to California, which kind of was the decision to get full-time into real estate. So as Amandeep alluded, over the last number of years, I've gone full-time to real estate. I've been investing in Canada and in the US. I'm currently also a realtor here in California with eXp Realty, and also a partner with WealthGenius and a coach. So over the past year, I've partnered with the founder, Alfonso Quadra, and the group is a group mainly based in Canada. But over the past, I would say 6 months, has expanded right across Canada. So we've got groups from Vancouver all the way to Halifax. Really, it's an educational and networking group where people are learning how to invest in real estate, markets, A to Z, from start to finish. Multifamily is one of the main focuses, but there's flippers, wholesalers, and all sorts of different strategies that we teach. And I've been brought in as a partner to expand the group as we now venture into the US, helping really Canadians understand how to invest in the US. And that's a program that we launched several months ago. I was in Toronto last month for a 2-day workshop, spoke in front of an audience of about 150 people. And really, again, just planting the seeds of helping them listen. The U.S. market is 10 times the size of Canada. There's a lot of similarities between Canada and the U.S., but there are also some significant differences. But really, from an investor standpoint, there's a tremendous value in considering diversifying and investing in the USA. So that's basically what was the message and the training for that event. And really, when people come on board and hire me as a coach, kind of take them from step one all the way through to laying a strong foundation, from taxation standpoint, to creating the right entity before starting to really look online. Oh, I want to buy this property. I saw a good deal in Dallas, or I saw a good deal in Atlanta. So hold on a sec. Let's take a step back and really analyze. All right, what are your long-term goals? And really kind of having a strong foundation to be able to move forward. So that kind of summarizes a little bit of the things I've been working on and who I am. Personally, I'm a father, husband. I have 3 kids. I've got an 11-year-old boy, 9-year-old girl, and a 1.5-year-old girl. So my hands are full also from a family and personal life perspective. And I also enjoy playing soccer, outdoors. What's one of the benefits of living in California? The weather is very consistent all year round. It's beautiful. So we've got 20 minutes to the ocean, 50 minutes to the mountains, and just the area we live in South Orange County is very nice for walking, hiking, just very outdoors lifestyle. So that's another element that makes up who I am.
This is so much about you. I know it's hard to summarize. We can have the whole podcast about that. So I was just thinking, like, you started way back, you were a mechanical engineer, then you went into flipping, investing, multifamily, coaching. So, what is your journey look like so far? How that progress happened? I was talking to my team. If somebody hands you $1 million, you won't be able to handle it because you don't have that discipline. You don't have the capabilities of doing that. So, how was your journey so far? Like, how you evolved during those years, and how you are refining those goals and keeping you on the track?
Yeah, and that's a great question. I mean, everyone's journey is different. My particular journey started when I just wanted to buy a house, want to move out of my parents' house, have my own space.
Hmm.
And I was 24 at the time, and I bought a three-bedroom townhome, and it was all I could afford at that time. And I put all my life savings into buying it. And I thought I bought it the peak of the market. This was 2004. I spent, I
Okay.
think, $212,000 on that three-bedroom townhome. And I was just like, wow, you know what? Maybe this is it. And it's never going to go up from here. But it didn't matter. I wanted to move out, have my own place. But what I soon realized, for a single guy, I mean, it was too much of a house. I didn't really need all that space. So I thought, why don't I put a tenant in the basement? So here's an interesting thing. I had a
Okay.
basement, but no shower in the basement. I found someone and convinced them to get a
Hmm.
membership at the gym across the street to take their showers there. And they agreed. So you can really think outside the box when it comes, to real estate. So my first tenant paid me at that time, I think it was $500 a month. And again, it was just one open room, one washroom, but not even a shower. But after that, he moved out maybe 6 months. I fixed up the basement properly. I put a kitchenette, I put a shower in the basement, and I had a tenant in there for maybe 8 years. And what I realized, that tenant was paying my mortgage. That was my
Hmm.
first real experience of being a landlord and seeing the value of real estate. I saying, wow, my my home expense is being subsidized, but there's one individual living in the basement. So I was
Hmm.
living mortgage free at that time. I said, okay, I need to do more of this. But unfortunately, I had no more money because I put all my money into this house.
Hmm.
And the challenge also was my environment. No one in my friend circle, my family circle were real estate investors. So the conversation when it came to investing was like, oh, stock market, mutual funds, those kind of conversations. Whereas I just had this idea of like, I want to get into real estate. So it really took 4 or 5 years later where I joined a group. And the minute I joined this group, the very first conversation I had with a gentleman who's younger than me, we were talking about real estate. I said, oh, how many properties do you have? He goes, five. My mind blew up. I'm like, you own five properties, five mortgages? And he's like, yeah. And
Hmm.
he was so happy. He goes, in our world, if you're able to get mortgages, it's a good thing, right? There's good leverage, bad leverage, good debt, bad debt. So that
Yes.
was like, I'm like, all right, I found the right place to be. So really, by joining that group, it forced me to take action. I was in a very fertile environment where I was getting the education and motivation and support that I needed. And within a few months, I got my next property, which was a duplex in Hamilton. So that's one thing I would encourage you, viewers, if you're interested, you're not in real estate yet, and you're interested to get into real estate, you probably want to set yourself up by getting into an environment where
Yes.
other people are doing what you're doing, bigger and better things. That one individual in that very first meeting I met, it was a shock because I'm thinking five mortgages. I'm kind of concerned and worried about one mortgage, right? Because we're not really taught about real estate in school. And from family and most people, when they think of real estate, it's just get a house, get a
Yes.
house, get a house, right?
Pay the
But
mortgage.
it's, I get as much house as you can, the biggest house you can get, because it's like, oh, it's the biggest asset you're gonna buy. But what I learned is, again, talking about the strategies and so forth, it kind of really expanded my mindset, expanded the type of ways of looking at real estate. So
Hmm.
again, bought that first duplex, and that was my first official rental property. And I really want to really get my hands dirty. So I really did everything on that property. I would drive
That's
an
good.
hour to Hamilton, roll up my sleeves. I would put the ads on the in the newspaper online, and try to vet these tenants. I would handle the contractor. I was doing everything, which was
Yes.
good. But looking back, I'm like, um, it was good initially, but I don't necessarily do that any longer.
Yes.
But everyone has a starting point. So really
Mm-hmm.
helped me to understand now when I hire someone what to look for, how these things really work. So that's another thing I would encourage people is you probably want to be involved a little bit to learn the
Mm-hmm.
ropes, understand how it operates before start hiring people to do everything for you.
Yes.
Um, and then it wasn't a perfect smooth road. You know, Put some tenants inside, had some rough tenants. So that was a learning curve as well. Whereas a duplex tenants were arguing, noise
Mm-hmm.
complaints with garbage. So I had to learn how to manage that. So with time comes experience. So I figured out, okay, I'm managing this property, deal with contractors and all sorts of things. And then I said, okay, I want to buy another property. So I went
Okay.
and bought a third property, which was a single family. And that was a little bit easier than that second property. Because now, again, like everything in life, you gain some experience, some confidence. You start meeting, you put together a nice team. So I had a good team of realtor, contractor, property manager. So it started becoming a little bit easier. But then what happened was I ran out of my own money. So at that point, I had about 3, 4 properties. I was like, all right, I'm going to have to wait. And I think I actually had about 5 properties where I had tapped out my own funds. So what are the
Okay.
opportunities? You can either stop there, wait till you save some more money, or what the education and the network had taught me, people were doing deals together. So this idea, a term of called JV, maybe some of you have heard it, joint
Mm-hmm.
venture came to mind. I was like, oh, what's this all about? And people are like, oh, we
Mm-hmm.
partner together. And I was like, oh, okay, how does that work? Well, you find someone and you present an opportunity. And if you're asking for money, you say, well, you put the money and I'll tell you all the reasons why it's a good opportunity and why you should invest with me because of all the experience you've gained. And then you move forward under a contract. The terms are stipulated, and you can continue this journey of creating a larger portfolio. So I learned that, and I said, okay, but I didn't implement it for several months until I found an opportunity, and I found another deal again in Hamilton, and I thought of, okay, who do I know? So another thing is about constantly networking. But my first official JV was with my sister. I have 2 younger sisters. So I approached my
Mm-hmm.
youngest sister. I say, listen, this is a good deal. At that time, it was like 2013. It was a townhouse in Hamilton, and it
Okay.
was like 134 grand at that time. So listen, this is a great little property, 134 grand. You put the mortgage, and we'll go 50-50 on the down payment and renovations, and I'll handle everything. I'll deal with the contractors, the tenants. You don't have to do anything. And then let's hold it for 5 years, and then we can refinance or sell. That was the game plan. So she agreed, bought the property, did some renos, put a tenant in place, and it was pretty good. Had some tenant issues, used a property manager, replaced the tenant. We kept that property until this year, and
Okay.
we sold that property very early this year for 485,000. So
Oh,
we
see the
we
growth is.
we 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 caught it on the right trajectory, right? So real estate is a market. Markets fluctuate depending
It's
on when you
time.
buy and when you sell. It could be good
Mm-hmm.
or bad. There's no guarantees.
Mm-hmm.
But when we had bought it at a pretty low point. And looking back, I wish I bought 50 of those properties. But it is what it is. I was still relatively new to real estate investing, but we kept it all these years, and then we ended up selling it for a considerable amount of profit. So that's just one example. And then from there, you get more confident. I'd moved now to California, but because I had created a strong network of investors, contacts,
Mm-hmm.
realtors, I was very confident on continuing to invest in the markets I was in. And really, Hamilton was my main area for a number of years.
Okay.
So I would just continue to do flips, mainly buy and hold, And then the market kept rising, so I started considering other markets. And in 2016, of all places, Windsor came on my radar. So I started investing in Windsor, and I probably drove through Windsor once in my life before that point. But for whatever reason, just the data I was researching just drew me to that market because I'm like, you could find single family homes for $80,000 at that time, which to me, I was like, that was shocking. I'm like, I mean, you could still find 100 under 100 grand in Ontario. So again, I'm doing all this virtually. So that's another thing I want to encourage you guys. You don't have to live in the markets that you invest. Everybody says, "Oh,
Hmm.
I want to go and touch the properties. I want to be able to drive there." Well, me moving to California and continue to invest in Canada really taught me how to learn to do things from long distance.
Hmm.
I was forced to. Now it's becoming more common. A lot of people investing, one part of the country to another part of the country, or now investing from Canada, US, or vice versa. Where I had to do
Okay.
it because I didn't know anybody when I initially moved to California. And I said, well, I can continue investing in Canada.
Hmm.
Um, I'm going to get to when I started investing in the US, but I just want to make that specific point that learning to invest long distance is a good thing because you end up doing less. You're forced to create a strong team, and then you manage your team. You're not so heavily involved in the nitty gritty stuff. You hire skilled people, they do
Yes.
the work, and you just manage them, right? That's really the essence of being a business owner, a CEO, where you're not really doing the physical work. You're more managing the people, and you're just managing, hiring the right people, managing them. So that's what I ended up doing, how I ended up investing in Windsor, where I found to make good contacts with realtors, property
Okay.
managers were key. And I ended up finding some off market deals through this networking I was doing. And that very first property, I think, it was a fiveplex through a property manager that was managing for another investor. So he put the deal together. I bought it, and then we ended up buying a nineplex that was on the market for a long time. That we ended up doing a full burr. And at this point now, I probably own about 30 units just in Windsor alone, all
Wow.
from long distance. So now let's shift into the US. So again, I moved 8 years ago to the US, so I
Okay.
wasn't in the system. So one thing Canadians need to realize, lenders operate very similar in the US as in Canada. When you go to qualify for a loan, they're going to want to see tax returns, your credit score, and your income. Um, Unfortunately, when I just moved there, I didn't have any of that. So, it took me a while after a few years to be able to get into the system to start qualifying for loans. Uh, and then I started investing in a different market because where I lived, similar to Toronto, high price market. So there were other markets much more affordable. And that's what I did. I started investing in Cleveland, Ohio, where my very first property I bought was $80,000 single family home that rented for like 950. And it was, what they call 1% rule, cash flowing. Property manager was managing it. Very simple, for a purchase of 80,000, I had to put about 30 grand down. And then my monthly net after all expenses was like 300, 350 a month type of thing. So pretty decent return for a completely hands-off, opportunity. So I
Hmm.
bought a few more of those in that market. And then I went to another market in Wilmington, North Carolina, had a property over there. And then over the years, just continued to grow and network, make contacts, and expand different markets. I ended up
Hmm.
getting my license in California, and also doing some projects in California. I was blessed that my father-in-law is a land developer and a builder. So I got involved in some larger opportunities here in California where we would buy raw
Wow.
land, get it approved for a subdivision, and then sell it to other builders or keep it for ourselves and bill it and sell individual
Okay.
lots as well.
Hmm. Hmm. So that's a quite interesting story. I know we can talk about it. So As the way I can relate, the turning point was the first rent you got, then you moved to duplex, JVs, then you thought of multifamily. So, what about it's like it's a beginner journey. It's those are the stepping stones. What about somebody who's already peaked out? They've already done the joint ventures. What's the next avenue for you? I heard like you're already doing multifamilies. What are the tips and tricks you want to share if somebody want to start doing a multifamily, let's say in Canada, in Windsor, or any market, or let's say in US? What are the golden nuggets you want to share about that?
Sure. So my journey is common where other people, as other people, you start with smaller
Yes.
assets, single family duplexes, 1 to 4 units, and then you kind of venture into
Hmm.
larger deals. But I've met other investors that have gone straight into multifamily. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to your comfort level, the opportunities, your contacts, and so forth, your access to capital. So for me, over the last couple of years, I've significantly grown my portfolio mainly through into multifamily asset
Yes.
class, and realizing when I bought my first building with a few partners, I mean, you've got metrics in multifamily they don't have in the smaller realm. You raise the rents across multiple doors. I mean, now you're increasing the value of the assets substantially. You increase,
Definitely.
a single family home rent by $100. It really doesn't translate much difference in the value of the asset. So once I realized that, I said, okay, I need to do more of these deals. And through my networking, I think networking has been one of my most powerful exercises of constantly networking, meeting people, because through that, I've met some really amazing individuals and I've been able to create some strategic alliances. And when certain ones that everything lines up, now it's like, well, let's do something together. And that's
Hmm.
what's happened over the last few years, where I've purchased, a motel that we've converted to Airbnb, purchased, buildings in Canada and the US, and now getting to larger deals, 100 plus deals through these strategic partnerships. In terms of like what I've found is the work sometimes is very similar working on like a 50 unit deal and compared to like a duplex. You still got to qualify for a loan and go through underwriting. There may be
Hmm.
some more work involved after the acquisition, like doing renovations, that sort of thing. But in terms of purchasing it, there's underwriting that's done. There's the capital that's required. Maybe there's some more capital. But when you've got strategic partners in place, you can share the workload versus a
Hmm.
smaller deal. It ends up being all for you to do. Now,
Hmm.
some people like that. They say, I want to own the whole pie, and that's fine. What I've learned, I'm fine owning a small portion of the watermelon compared to the whole grape because it allows me to do larger deals, grow larger, faster, but also to kind of divide the amount of work involved.
Hmm.
So in some deals, my work may be raising capital, and that's it. In some deals, it may be like qualifying for the mortgage. In other ones, it may be more hands-on, dealing with the property managers, tenants, and contractors. But when you've got partners involved, you can divide the workload, you can divide the responsibilities. So it really expand at a much faster pace by having these strategic alliances.
Definitely. So you're talking about networking is the key. You scale as you learn from each other's experiences. That's why you thought multifamily is more feasible for you. So what about any recent project you want to talk about? What is keeping you busy these days?
So, I mean, one thing right now is the Wealth Genius has been keeping me considerably busy because getting this off the ground, there
Yes.
is, the systems and the processes now of onboarding, coaching clients, doing the actual, one-on-one sessions, the events as well. So that has been a big um, element of what's keeping me busy. Also, with the market shifting over the last 6 months in both Canada, US,
Hmm.
so me and my team, we're still analyzing deals, but with rates going up, markets slowing down, we're underwriting
Yes.
them completely different now.
Hmm.
So the way we were analyzing deals before and now has changed. And because of that, I haven't pulled the trigger as many deals because the seller expectation hasn't changed as quickly as the market has changed. So I am continuing to make offers. Me and my team are making offers, but they haven't jived because the sellers still haven't realized, wait a minute, and you're probably experiencing that also in your market, where the
Yes.
seller is still thinking the price is over here. I'm like, actually, when you factor in the higher rates and the increased cap rates, really the valuation of the asset now is considerably lower. So I'm making offers
Mm-hmm.
on 50-unit deals, $1 million less than what they're asking, because that's really what the value is currently. So
Mm-hmm.
in the meantime, I'm making offers. If something, I don't see, this is one thing we all want to. Once you're in this world of real estate, you want to move fast, but
Yes.
it's much more important to move smart, more strategic. So there's a certain level, I think, wisdom we have to take in realizing not to do a deal just to do a deal, do a good deal, and that takes longer, takes more patience, takes more finesse to understand. All right, is this really a good deal? When you add in
Yes.
increased vacancy number, increased repairs, increased potential expenses, and then factor in a higher rate, like people are underwriting the rates 7, 8, 9, even 10% mortgage rates, right? How does the deal perform at that level? If it doesn't perform well, don't do the deal. Even though it look like a gorgeous building, still you
Mm-hmm.
don't want to get caught because we don't know how long the market condition is going to continue or if it's going to get worse. So don't do a deal just to do the deal. So what I've been able to do is kind of rein in my expectations and my investors. Again, when you're at this level, you're also raising capital. So now you've got
Yes.
investors to answer to. So you want to be a good steward of their capital and make sure you're doing a good job. So also it's a matter of like, all right, now it's not just my money, it's my investor money. I'm gonna be patient until I find a good deal. So what have I been doing in the meantime? To answer your question, I've been doing some private lending on the side, and that's been able to make my money continue to work, but a more safe. And I've been able to support some other investors, and also doesn't take any of my bandwidth as well. So if I could maybe explain it into like a pie, a portion of my time is spent on WealthGenius expansion and coaching. A
Okay.
portion of my time is sourcing multifamily opportunities, underwriting, and a portion of my time, really my available capital, has been giving it to like towards private lending, and that's been able to
Mm-hmm.
get a solid return on my money while I'm looking for a deal. And it's short-term loans, 2 to 6 months tops. And
Okay.
that's something other investors may want to explore because money in the bank, it's kind of really losing value there. But you don't want to put your money into a deal where it gets stuck or it's really not going to grant you that good of a return. And now with the lending tightening, you can get substantially higher rates for private lending. We're talking like high teens, low 20s. I've even done some loans at 36 and even 48%. So just kind of throwing it out there. Again, in real estate, there's many ways of creating wealth. There's many
Mm-hmm.
opportunities. But as a well-rounded investor, it's good to have, your arsenal of the different types of strategies and different tools available to you. And say, all right, you know what? For the next 7 to 8 months, I'm not going to pull a trigger on a deal unless it meets this specific metric. You're just going to be very diligent on having those, that criteria outlined and really focus on that. In the meantime, I'll do private lending. My money's working, making a return on it, coaching, servicing, clients, generating some revenue there as well, expanding the group into the US and so forth. So that's kind of how I've been balancing my time. Other people have been busy doing flipping, wholesaling, and so forth. But again, that's more active and stuff. Whereas passive,
Mm-hmm.
lending is another way of creating, generating a return on your money, which doesn't really involve much of your time.
Definitely. So basically, diversification is the key. Obviously, you diversify in different asset class. So as you told, you were like born in Toronto, you moved to States. So just a question, like somebody was looking into exploring, US, it's a good opportunity as you talked about already. So what are the tax implications you have? Like, are you involved in two countries? Is it like easy? Have you had any issues with that?
That's a good question. So at this point, I'm a dual citizen, but even prior to becoming a US citizen, I
Okay.
reside in the States, but I had investments in Canada. So that
Okay.
forced me to file tax returns in both countries. So citizenship doesn't really play that much of a factor. It's really your status, where do you reside, the country of
Where you
residency.
reside. Hmm.
So
Hmm.
when I moved to the US, I file US returns because I'm making money in the US, but I still had
Hmm.
properties and income generating in Canada, so I would file returns in Canada. I make It wasn't rocket science. You just need to know, and I'll have my professional CPAs handling it. Just give them the information they need, and they file tax returns accordingly. But for most Canadians who aren't residents in the US, there's a considerable amount of consideration when you are going to invest into the US. So
Okay.
that's one of the things I talked about the 2-day boot camp I had last month in Toronto. I mean, you definitely want to know a certain level what your options are. There's a lot of consideration from a tax standpoint, and I mentioned earlier, financing standpoint. I mean, really, the tax is probably the biggest concern because everyone's like, I don't want to get double taxed. And great. You don't want to get into a position where you're taxed significantly more than you really have to. But the reality is you're going to be taxed. And there's a lot of depends on. And it's interesting because I had a couple of CPAs at the event and they stood up and they're like, you know, you know, Thomas has made it clear he's not a CPA, which I'm not. So everything I say is from my standpoint. But even from them as a CPA, saying everything depends on everyone's scenario. So
Mhm.
everyone wants a cookie cutter kind of like uh, plan,
Reply, right answer. Yeah. Mhm.
outline, and say, okay, this is it. But it's not that easy. So everything
No.
there's multiple factors to consider. How much you're claiming in Canada is one of them. So whatever tax bracket you fall in Canada will have an impact as you invest in the US. Because depending on that, there may be a situation where the US will get first dibs on tax, but then there's an excess and Canada will get the rest of it. Or if you're in a lower tax bracket, the US will get the first dibs and there's nothing left for Canada. But then there's also how you're going to purchase these properties, the
Okay.
vesting. Well, how are you going to acquire it? Are you going to acquire in your personal name? Are you going to acquire it in a Canadian corp? Are you going to acquire it in a US corp? And which US corp? Because even within the US, there's a number of different entity classes. LLCs are the most common structure for
Okay.
US investors, limited liability corporation, but
Hmm.
they're definitely not recommended for Canadians because they don't operate the same way for Canadians than they do for US residents, mainly
Okay.
because they're a flow through for US residents. So what most CPAs would probably suggest for Canadians is an LP structure, a limited partnership structure, which operates similarly. But to make this kind of a little bit easier to understand, you're going to have to make a decision how you're going to purchase a property. And also, that will stem from what's your goal. If your goal is to Florida to go vacation a couple times a year and then rent it the rest of the year out, it may make most sense just to go buy there in cash or with like a Canadian lender, because there are some banks in Canada that will lend on vacation homes in the US. They may
Okay.
cap it at one or two properties type of thing, but that may be the best thing for you, the simplest, and the less complicated. Because once you start creating entities, you have to start factoring in you're gonna have to apply, do tax returns for those entities, and then there's the legal setup cost. There's the accounting, filing returns, and the cost for the accounting every year. So once that adds up, you got to really see if it makes sense to start going down that avenue. But if your plan is
Mm.
to create a portfolio of assets in the US, then you really want to have a sit down conversation with a cross border expert. And I highly suggest a cross border because it's too often, you'll find that someone referred to you like accountant or a lawyer in Toronto or in Canada, but they're not a cross-border expert. You really want someone who understands
Yes.
that. And then put a game plan together based on your plans. If your plan is to have a portfolio of assets in the U.S., then they're going to start suggestions of creating most likely multiple entities. So there's a cost that you're going to have to invest in. So if you're prepared, if you have a specific goal, they can lay out the plan, how to prepare yourself. And it could be a multitude of combination. It could stem with a Canadian holding company, a U.S. holding company, and a U.S. Active corporation. So you have a multi-tier scenario. Once you bring in potential partners, then that raises other considerations, and depending on how many partners, if they're going to be active or passive, then it starts creating a more complex scenario. You can get into a syndication where you, as the general partner, start raising funds from accredited or non-accredited investors, and that opens up a whole other slew of kind of legalities to consider.
Hmm.
Everything from talking to an SEC attorney and creating a PPM, which is a private placement memorandum subscription model. But again, it can get very complicated, but it all depends on your goals and how you want to move forward. And sometimes it's just like you just want to try, let's just do one deal and see if it works. Perhaps you want to invest passively into a deal in the US to see if that's something that makes sense for you. That's kind of maybe what I may suggest. If you're in Canada, you're thinking, okay, I want to get into US, I want to get into large US multifamily,
Yes.
because that's one thing I want to say on that specifically. The opportunities in the US are 10 times, the opportunities in Canada. You go on to, the US LoopNet or any of these Crexy websites, type in multifamily, you'll get hundreds of deals. If you go on realtor.ca, there's none. There's no opportunity over 50 units. Those are all traded privately between, REITs and private equity firms in Canada. It's a smaller market, it's a smaller sandbox. So now you see all these deals. I want to invest in the US. It may make sense for you to consider investing into someone else's deal. Say, okay, let me invest into this deal. Let me kind of learn, ask questions, understand it. Let me file my tax returns in the US, see how that experience was. And then from there, potentially say, okay, maybe you continue to invest passively, or maybe you
Hmm.
want to say, okay, now I've kind of learned it from these other experts. Now I'll do my own deal and go forward like
Makes
that.
sense. Definitely. So I have a question here, right? So it's basically related to CMSC funding. So can we buy an old commercial property, let's say multifamily, and then have it regulated like for CMSC? Is that a possibility by renovating it as per their guidelines?
So CMHC is in Canada, right?
Yes.
Are we? Is the question? Is there an applicable entity in the U.S. or is that
No,
what
it's
you're talking
maybe
in general?
maybe it's a journal. I think it's in a Canadian. Let's say, for example, maybe I'm not sure about US what entity they have. In Canada, you have CMSC funded
Yes,
projects.
I
Yeah.
think if the question is, can you buy a commercial asset with CMHC, add some value, and then refinance it, or acquire it with private funding or B lender, add some
Yes.
value, right? How do you add value? Do renovations, increase the rent. Once you add that value, then the appraisal comes in higher, and then refinance it with someone like CMHC. Yes, like that's the burst strategy in essence, and that's very common in both sides of the border. So it's
Okay.
definitely possible.
So
And
that
and basically,
possibility is
commercial, if you're talking like a mixed use or just in general, commercial really comes to play over 5 units. So once you 6 units and plus, you're really playing in a commercial realm.
hmm. So there's a question, right? What type of conditions you put when you buy a commercial property? So
Oh
anything
well.
specific to a residential, like a duplex one? What are the specific things, like in particular, you need to look?
Well, one thing when it comes to commercial real estate, the creativity is really endless. You can really go, I mean, you can really go into the creativity of how you want to structure a deal. I was talking to someone earlier today about an agreement for sale strategy where you basically you make an offer on a property, but you don't close it for let's say 12 months, but you
Yes.
control the asset. So think about that particular strategy. And why would you utilize that strategy? Well, maybe you find a property that's underperforming. If you close on it now, the lender may be like, well, I'm going to give you 50% loan to value because the rents are super low. And
Hmm.
you're like, well, that's a lot of money I need to raise. What about if we agree on a price with the seller today, but we don't close for a year, but I can go in the meantime, do renovations, raise the rent, and then close at that agreed upon price today. Maybe over that year, I can force that value up substantially. That when I actually close on it, the loan comes in higher. That I can actually, basically get my money back and now own the building. So that's basically it's kind of like a burst strategy, but doing it a little bit different. I mean, that's just one, kind of creative way. VTBs very common in Canada. VTBs are not as common in the US, and I'll tell you why. There's
Okay.
something called 1031 exchange in the US, which allows investors to sell an asset but defer taxes by rolling the profit to the next deal if it's done within a certain period of time. So because of that availability, you're able to defer taxes. There's more incentive for a seller to sell the building. Whereas in Canada, we know that as long as you don't sell, you won't pay taxes. So why
Yes.
don't I just hold on this thing forever, and then I'll just offer a VTB, or I'll offer either I'll keep the property forever and just do refinances, or I'll offer a VTB because you know what? If I hold back a portion, I don't pay all the taxes that first year. And then that way, I could spread my tax over several years. So at the end of the day, the hit's a little bit less. So VTB is a strategy. In terms of conditions specifically, like you want to have a period of time to do your due diligence. So the longer the better. So think about that in many different ways. So one way I think about it, I'm looking any time to raise capital on a deal. I need time to really do all my inspections and comps and studies. Some lenders may require environmental studies and so forth. So you need time for that. Is 30 days enough? Probably not. So can you push out a deal, your contingency period to 60, 90 days? The longer the
Hmm.
better because you control the asset and you have no real risk because you can cancel anytime and get your deposit funds back. So if you're able to push out your contingency period, then do that. That's my first kind of suggestion. In terms of closing, then it's up to you. Do you need more time to close after the fact or not? So those are kind of like the top thing that comes to my mind is your contingency period. Um, at the same time, depending on the market cycle, like in this market, which has shifted now from a solid seller's market to now leaning towards buyers, I'm able to get concessions for my buyer clients as well. You probably experienced that too, Mandeep. So, like for instance, this week I put my buyer client into a deal. This is for a single family, but I was able to negotiate a $10,000 on an $800,000 property. I was able to negotiate a $10,000 credit by the buyer that could be applied towards closing costs or towards the mortgage rate pay down. So think about that. You can have the seller credit you to be applied to your loan to reduce the rate. So if your lender quotes you at like a 6.5 rate, and you say, well, if I can I pay down to get a lower rate? So yeah, if you will knock a 1% off the rate. Okay, Mr. Seller, can you pay that $10,000 to my lender so I can go from 6.5 to 5.5? And what does that translate? That translates to maybe like $150 less every month for the
Hmm.
next potentially 30 years. Because in the US, you can lock in a mortgage for 30 years, which in Canada we can't. But again, that's just one particular condition now we incorporated into into offers. And actually, this week on social media, I posted something specific. Which option would you take? Would you, if we're talking $10,000 on a particular deal, Would you
Okay.
negotiate $10,000 price reduction,
Hmm.
$10,000 mortgage rate buy down, or $10,000 towards your closing costs, reducing your closing costs?
So I think it's very subjective, a conditional dependent question.
Well, it
So,
is, but also if you really analyze things, it's depending on several factors. So one is there a mortgage? If there is a mortgage, then most likely a $10,000 in price reduction is not going to really, if I mean, affect your pocket very much, because
cash
the
flow. Mhm.
likelihood is you're going to put like 20% down, and that $10,000 gets put into the mortgage. It's like a couple dollars a month less a month. So $10,000 a price reduction doesn't really do much. Now, a $10,000 on a mortgage rate buy down may save you maybe $100 a month potentially, but $10,000 off your closing costs as a credit, that's going to be an instant benefit for you, meaning you put $10,000 less at the table to acquire the property. So now you think about, do you want to save $10,000 today, or would you rather save $100 over like 30
Per
years?
month, right? Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So these are the kind of things that kind of I look at, and negotiating these things. And this comes from experience. No one necessarily taught me, through experience. And sometimes I use strategies in commercial real estate, bring it to the residential world and apply it. And people are like, what is that? Like, what's a credit? You know what I'm saying? It's not as common. Even the lawyers sometimes don't, we don't know if this is legal. I'm like, it's legal. I mean, we're being completely transparent. We're just not, for the seller, it may make no difference, but from the buyer's perspective, it can make a substantial difference.
Definitely. It's all about the deal structure that you want to do. So those were the commercial things, right? What about like you are into multiple things as of now? How you balance your day so far? I know you are busy as a father, as a husband, and on a professional, you have wealth, genius, private lending, a lot of multifamily happenings. So how you manage your day-to-day activities and the it's everybody have 24 hours.
Yes, great question. I think that's one of the most common question I get, and it's something I've had to learn and figure out over time. And I think
Yes.
now I'm gotten to a point where it's getting better. I mentioned earlier about strategic partnerships. I've found if I partner with certain individuals for certain parts of my business, I get to leverage their time, their expertise, and it requires less of my input and time. So
Okay.
we talk about other people's money a lot in real estate, but we have to leverage other people's time as well. That's probably even more valuable than other people's money.
Mm-hmm.
So if you
Mm-hmm.
can think of ways that you can get your time back by delegating it, and sometimes with an employee like a VA or a hired person, or you bring on a partner and you give away a portion of the deal or the opportunity, but they're able to do a certain amount of the work, then it may make perfect sense. So that's what I've been doing over the last few years, and it's worked very well. Also, time blocking has been instrumental. So I've been using what I call, I mean, I use Calendly app strategically. What I'll
Okay.
do is I'll block a certain time slots on Calendly, and I'll strategically use that by forwarding to people and say, you pick a time that works for you. When they open up my Calendly calendar, there's only certain times per day available for them. So although they're picking the time, I've basically made the limitations on when they can book that time in my calendar. So week to
Mm-hmm.
week, day to day, my coaching calls will be like a certain time of the day, most likely late mornings. My what I call discovery calls, and that could be an investor, that could be someone that wants to hire me as a coach, that could be someone looking to, I mean, to buy a deal, maybe having represent them as an agent. That will most likely be in the afternoon. And really, I try to end those as much as possible about 5:30. So when I go home, I block my time for my family time. And then most of the time, everyone goes to sleep like, 8:30, 9 o'clock. And I mean, I've gone, I like, for me, the amount of sleep I really need is about 6 hours of sleep. So I can pick up some work again if I really need to between 10 o'clock and midnight, and that allows me to get sufficient amount of sleep, and then start my day over again. But definitely want to have a balance. I mentioned about, like, I mean, health is also a consideration. So being able to incorporate some kind of physical activity into your lifestyle. So really, it's like organizing your schedule, entering where you think what's important to you fits, and just being diligent and not allowing things to really interfere. Whereas the past, too often I'm doing something pops up, and I get distracted on that, and then I'm jumping around, and I mean, you lose time, you lose hours to your day, and you're like, man, this wasn't a very productive day. I was supposed to do this, this, and this, but then I did this, and then this came into play, this came into play. So you have to be aware of that and really kind of like control your time, really manage it well and just push out distractions. And if those people want your time, schedule it. Here's my calendar, schedule it. Happy to talk to you, schedule a time that works for you. So usually my calendar is booked usually at least 2 weeks ahead, a lot of these appointments type of thing. And people like it.
Hmm.
I think people will respect you more if they see, wow, okay, this person's organized. This person, I mean, he's busy. So they're gonna value, say, okay, I'm gonna schedule into their schedule a time that works. They will be a little more attentive, and that all that element comes to play, being a little bit more structured and have certain systems, and these are kind of systems I've been able to incorporate.
Definitely. So systems are helping you scale. Obviously, everybody have the limited time, and then you control your time rather than asking people to control it. So, Thomas, like, uh, you have been into real estate from years. What is the overall goal if you want to talk about what is the goal you have in a short term or a long term? What do your vision look like? I know those things change as you evolve. My goals are different, which was different 6 months back. So now I'm more focused about team building. That's a different story altogether. So what are you looking up to next coming months or coming years, if anything you want to share a bit with our viewers?
Yeah, good question. So, in the past, it was like, oh, I want a certain number of sales as a realtor, or I want a certain number of units as an investor, which is good. I mean, we
Yes.
need to have some sort of target. Say, okay, this year I want to acquire, 50 units or 100 units. It's good to have those kind of goals, or I want to close like
Mhm.
20, 30 deals as a realtor. Those are great, and I've incorporated that. But now I've realized becoming a coach and being part of Wealth Genius has expanded my vision much bigger. Before it was all about me, but when you start making about other people, I mean, now the goal starts to take on a life of its own. And what the goal now is to expand, Wealth Genius as a training and networking platform all across the
Okay.
U.S. So now we've
Hmm.
got, let's say, 400 members in Canada. The goal is like 4,000 members in the US. We want 10x that. Because now if we've got 4,000 members in the US spread across the US, all those members are going to be a great support system for the Canadians that want to invest in the US. Now you've got boots in the
Definitely.
ground, potential partners, access to deals and opportunity in the US. So that's one of my biggest focus right now. It's creating an expansion for Wealth Genius, to be able to grow as a brand, grow as a group, and really 10x. That's one of my main focuses. Me personally, I've got some strategic partnerships. So I've got like a syndication partnership that we've got goals of like owning 10,000 units over the next 5 years. So that's one segment. But of course, there's contingencies on that. Market conditions will come to
Yes.
factor. So maybe early this year, 1,000 units was feasible, but now it's like, well, it may be lots, may take a lot longer to get to 1,000 units. So let's just reel that in. But you want to have goals so it pushes you outside your comfort zone, but at the same time, I mean, you have to be. I'm more like a realist to realize, all right, there's certain things outside of my control. So I'm putting certain goals in place, but let me put some bigger goals. And even if it falls short, it's still going to be bigger than if I didn't have any goals. I think that's the key when you
That's it.
goal set, right?
Definitely, Sam. It's a very golden nugget that you shared about. It's always have to good to have your vision board. Always have to have. unachievable goals, and then you achieve it, and then your targets are always beyond your expectations. Very well said. So Thomas, like, let's say on your personal behalf, where are you planning your next vacation?
In terms of, so we have a boots on the ground event in Tampa Bay, Florida coming up in December. We're going to be
Okay.
hosting about 20 people from Canada coming down there. But
Okay.
I mean, I'm based in California. I'm investing in several markets in the US, several markets in Canada. And, in terms of coming back and forth, like I've been 3 times back in Canada this year, maybe one more time before the end of the year. But in terms of investing, yeah, I mean, I have a few markets that I've focused on. One of the things I talked about the 2-day boot camp are more landlord-friendly, investor-focused markets, and there's certain metrics to consider. From rent control versus non-rent control markets. Which ones have people moving to versus one people are moving out. Which ones are business-oriented, business are moving to versus ones they're not. So those are factors to consider as an investor. But for myself personally, I mean, I think right now, based in California, I don't have any plan necessary to move. But you never know, right? Everyone asks me, "Would you ever move back?" I mean, the option is there. I still have my Canadian passport. I could always do that.
It's always an edge to have it. So how's the life like? Obviously, you said about the life is 10x. I have been there in US. Obviously, we are going next month also to Vegas. But how do you feel overall? Like somebody who's like have a well-established things in Canada. Are we thinking like making move to US is like more of a 10x thing, or they can grow the 10x business in Canada also? What do you feel a difference when you do a deal in US compared to Canada?
Ultimately, I think there's just much, much more opportunity in the US. The Canadian
Definitely.
market is a small market. That's just the reality of it. You've got
Hmm.
30 something million people in all of Canada, which
Hmm.
those people fit in one state. I think the state of California has
Yes.
more people than all of Canada. So
Hmm.
market conditions, opportunities and also the capitalistic mindset in the US, much more business oriented than in Canada. Canada is more like a socialistic kind of like environment, a lot of government regulations, which kind of
Yes.
it stifles the business minded person, right? And the growth is just not there. And as I mentioned earlier, just even from opportunities for deals, like there's not as many in Canada. So some of my coaching clients like, wow, I go online, I look North Carolina, 150 units. I pick up the agent and they're speaking to me. I'm like, yeah. I mean, those are accessible to anybody. 120 units, 150 unit apartments. You can make those. You can acquire that. It just they're not available in Canada. Try and go online on any Canadian website. Can you find a list of 100 plus unit buildings to buy? No, it's virtually impossible. So I think Canadians need to factor that in. They need to, if you're a serious investor, you need to look at the US. I'm not saying only the US, but diversify and factor and say, okay, I'm going to expand. I'm going to put a certain amount of my resources, time, funding, and capital into investing in the US. Yes, there's the foreign exchange rate. Yes, there's the taxation to consider. But the reality is, Canadians are investing in the US. They are
Hmm.
actually the number one investors in the world into the US. It goes Canada. China was up there at one point, but that slowed down. So after there's Canadians invest in the US, you've got a lot of the Asian markets investing in the US as well. So it's not rocket science. It's just learning, getting the right people to create your power team and start taking the action. And like I suggested earlier, maybe do as a passive investor until you see if it's something you want to take more serious and do on your own. But it's within your reach. That's the bottom line message. I don't want people thinking this is too difficult. And that's one of the things I share in WealthGenius and even at that 2-day boot camp. We want to erase that border, that line, which it tends to block people from taking that step. They just think tax, forget it. It's just too complicated, right? But it shouldn't be. So it's just a matter of like speak to the right people, perhaps get a coach, but really taking the steps and then take the action.
Definitely, that's really motivating, and I can see Wealth Genius is already erasing that border thing, taking that action, and putting. It's all about you took your initiative, you're sharing your time and energy, and then you're sharing it with the people who want to take the real action. And when we are having the next Wealth Genius conference,
Well, honestly, they're happening every month. So, like
oh, is
this
it?
week, we have in Ottawa, they've got events in Montreal, Halifax,
Oh,
Vancouver,
wow,
Calgary. The next one in the US specifically is going to be the Tampa one. But coming up in the new year, I think 2023 is going to have a long list of opportunities for Canadians to have boots on the ground in the US. I mean, this is the vision. So, right now, if you're interested, I would say attend some of these free workshops, attend some of these events in your market. I mean, WealthGenius is from, like I said earlier, Vancouver to Halifax. So wherever you are, Edmonton, there's events going to happen in Edmonton. Here in Montreal, it's going to happen in Montreal. Find one, attend it, see what's all about, have some questions answered, network. I tell people, yes, the training, the coaching, the modules is all great, but the secret sauce of the group is the people. That's the bottom line.
people,
It's
yes,
attractive. I've been
definitely.
parts of other networks, other groups, but for whatever reason, WealthGenius has attracted some really amazing people. The people in the group is the secret sauce. People are partnering on deals. They're raising capital together. It's just a lot of just magic is happening from the people. Very active group. So newer investors are coming in after a few months. They're doing like 20 units, 30 units. They're partnering with other more experienced operators. It's been a pleasure to be part of this group and just to kind of see the growth. Because I joined in January, I think there was maybe 100 members at that time, and now it's like 400. So it's been
Wow,
amazing to see the growth. Now we're hiring. I mean, we're getting more coaches. This past 3 days, yesterday, today, and tomorrow, we've got coaching training happening. So I'm getting my first other U.S. coach because as the group expands, I can only handle myself direct, coaching clients only so many. So I need to kind of create more coaches as well. So that's what we're doing. It's this is a group that is we have a back end support. We've got like a team in place. It's not just kind of like one of those random meetups. It's a real company that we're creating and we're growing with systems and support. So there is like 15, 16 coaches currently. And now we're expanding now in different markets. We have a back end system, onboarding, and so forth. So yeah, I'm excited for the group as a whole and yeah, definitely I would encourage people to check it out.
definitely. They, would share the links for that Wealth Genius. Any last thoughts for with our audience before we leave? I think we are already over running time. It's a long discussion. We never thought like so many things to talk about. Any last thoughts you have for our viewers?
I mean, listen, I'm just a pleasure to be here, Mandeep. Thank you for inviting me to your podcast.
Thank you.
Definitely, I've been seeing some of the stuff you've been posting. You're doing some amazing things yourself. But just happy to be here, sharing my journey, sharing my experience with anybody. Feel free. I'm right here. You can see this is my handle on Instagram. If you want to DM me, get some more information about me. But really, I just want to come from a position of giving knowledge, experience, contribution as much as I can. I don't pretend to know everything. I'm learning. That's one of the things I always share. I'm a learner just as much as you are. We're just at a different. We could be at just a different interval of the learning path. So
Mm,
I'm happy to connect, and and I love just learning and connecting with people and networking. It's all about helping each other.
definitely. Thank you, Thomas. High five from all the way from Canada, Toronto, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks a
sir.
lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.